ranking the Metroid games. This is going to be one of the most controversial videos of this entire channel to this very day. Hello everyone, my name is Frostyrnb, the Frostman himself. Today we're going to be ranking the Metroid games. Now disclaimer, these are just my opinions and my opinions at the end of the day. If you do not agree with this list, just go ahead and drop a comment down below and let me know what your favorite Metroid game is and why. My relationship with the Metroid series has always been a really brutal one. Think of it as like a boot camp. I started with the hardest games of the entire series. It just wanted me to just keep going. My first game I've ever played from the Metroid series is definitely Metroid Fusion, 40 GBA, but I played it on emulation. Now, when I first played Metroid Fusion, this game was way too difficult, especially with the enemies and bosses and how much the player took, but I just wanted to kept going. The main reason why is because I liked the music, bosses were very interesting, so this got me hooked. I'm all alone in this space station, fighting all these monsters, and the Federation doesn't really trust us. They're just using us as a tool. Fast forward to 2004, Metroid Prime 2 Echoes came out around holiday season. I was around 11 years old, picked it up. If you thought Fusion was hard, Metroid Prime 2 destroys it in difficulty. I learned that the hard way. That's how my relationship with the Metroid series has been. Let's go ahead and jump into the tier list. Now, with the format of this tier list, it's going to be much different from how I did it from the Legend of Zelda series. Metroid actually has an official canon timeline. That's how we're going to be ordering these games. S just means that it's really good, considered as a masterpiece in the series. A is it's really good, but there are very few flaws from making it to S tier. B just means it's a really good game, but it could definitely use some improvements. C is just average, and F just means it's really outdated or it's not as replayable as it used to be. Now I need to make a very quick disclosure. There are two Metroid official mangas that do tell the origins of Samus and how she came to be. However, that will be covered in a separate video because it's a manga adaptation of the video game. The very first Metroid game, honestly, this one is so outdated and highly unreplayable unless you really like difficulty. I myself couldn't finish the original Metroid game because it didn't have a save feature, even though it worked with passwords. And two, this is a horde maze. I mean, there's no mapping system. Legitimately, you had to create your own map or actually use a guide back then. Now, I played Metroid, the original one, on the Game Boy Advance with the NES classic cartridges. No, I couldn't get into the first one. Zero Mission, on the other hand, is an S tier game. So, Zero Mission definitely tells a lot more story in depth compared to the original one. And that's saying something because Metroid games aren't really about story as much. It's more about lore and isolation gameplay. Metroid Zero Mission does add some content, but that's not what makes it really good. The mechanics, physics, it has a mapping system, like gameplay compared to the original one, it just smashes it out of complete existence. Now, I'm gonna get a lot of hate for saying this upcoming game. I think Prime 1, I 100%ed it before, but I don't really anything about it besides the great OST. For me, it gets to see probably the Prime trilogy game that I got lost in the most. It's not the most difficult, but it's definitely one of the more confusing in terms of like backtracking. The boss fights are, most of them are good, but Meta really was not my favorite, and I know that's a crowd favorite as well. Metroid Prime Hunters, it would have been a B tier game, but because Nintendo took down the multiplayer aspect in terms of the server, and due to the fact that I came to this game with very high expectations, it's an F tier. Now, don't get me wrong, ladies and gentlemen, I really do like the graphical style artwork for this game, especially since it was on a DS at the time. And the fact that the presentation was so good. I did like the hunters, but the boss fights just didn't justify the opportunity cost of my time. The controls were really awkward. I kept getting hand cramps from playing this game. The fact that the first hunt demo was more enjoyable to me than the actual core game itself, I just came in with very disappointment at the end of the day. The only positive thing I can say about this game is two things. It has a foil cover, which it looks really nice, by the way. And two, people are still looking for this game to this very day. This game could have used a lot more improvements. It would have stayed in B tier if multiplayer was still active, but it gets an F tier for me. I didn't like the single player campaign. What do I need to say about Metroid Prime 2 Echoes? It's an S tier game for me. The fact that I have nostalgia biases from this game, It was the second Metroid game I've ever played, and the fact that it had really good boss battles besides the Boost Guardian, I hated that thing. Metroid Prime 2 Echoes didn't have as much backtracking compared to Prime 1 until you get to the very end game, where you had to go for the Sky Temple keys. And that's a different story, but Emperor Ing, in my personal opinion, is probably one of the best bosses of the entire Prime trilogy. Metroid Prime 2 Echoes, don't start with this game if you're a beginner. However, if you're looking for a really good challenge and have played previous games in the series, I would highly recommend it. Prime 3 Corruption. What do I need to say about this game, despite the fact that I hate motion control? It's a very easy Metroid game, if not probably one of the easiest of the entire series. Great starter game for those who are very curious to the series. It gets an A for me, but the boss themes are really good. Samus goes through the stages of grief. I mean, the hunters did a really well job. Gondreda, Rundus, Dark Samus, the Leviathan. Those were really good boss fights. Omega really is also good too, but those four are like the bosses I think about the Prime trilogy. The OST is variations of both Prime 1 and 2. Gondreda's theme is a very good example from Prime 2's variation of the mosquito boss. I forgot its name. It's just really easy to cheese this game. The only hard part is the planets are so huge in terms of exploration. Be the biggest challenge that newcomers will have to face, but Metroid, you're gonna get lost very easily either way. Fed Force. This is an F tier game for me. I hate this game. Sure, it has a better single campaign compared to Triforce Heroes. If you guys recall the trailer for this game when it was first announced, it had a lot of dislikes because you weren't playing as Samus, you were playing as the Fed Troopers. The fact that they put Samus as a final boss in this game, I don't know, it just doesn't flow and it doesn't feel like a Metroid game to me. So Fed Force is definitely the worst Metroid game in my personal opinion. One of the most recent controversials of the entire series. I'm not talking about Metroid 2 for the Game Boy, but this game is definitely F tier. Not because it's terrible, it's actually one of the best games of the entire Game Boy library, but it's just highly unreplayable with the remake. And the fact that Samus' sprite is way too big, I don't really see myself replaying this game. Now, if we're talking about the remake, this is a very controversial game. There was a fan-made project called AM2R, which uses zero missions mechanics and completely overhauled and remade Metroid 2 as a brand new game. Now, needless to say, AM2R is a fan-made project, not a Nintendo official licensed product. The remake, I have not finished this, but I would consider this as B. It's a very good starting point. Unlike the Prime games and the previous entries we talked about, it's not as focused as exploration as those games. There are some explorations if you want to grab the upgrades and expansions. It's more linear because you're hunting down Metroid and trying to eradicate them. Needless to say, I mean, there's a lot of different improvements compared to the original one, don't get me wrong. It just doesn't have that magic touch. Super Metroid. My first exposure to this game was on the Wii Virtual Console as a B game. I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen, this is a crowd favorite, but I do like this game. It definitely has probably one of the most difficult Ridley fights of the entire series, in my personal opinion. It is very ominous, but I don't know why I couldn't get into the game in terms of replayability, and I have finished this game twice. But needless to say, this one's also a good starting point as well. However, expect to have that retro difficulty that it's going to kick your butt in the beginning game. Other Freckles and the most hated game of the entire series. Me personally, I really enjoyed this game's gameplay and the cinematic presentation. I remember being very excited for this game in theaters because the trailer looked really great. I thought we were getting a movie Metroid game for Freckles' sake. I was overly hyped, and when I bought it, a little disappointing, but not as disappointed as the other fan bases, because the fan base hates this game due to the fact that they hated Samus's character. They didn't like the gameplay. The only problems I had with it was certain parts where Adam Malkovich, great character by the way, he authorizes things at such an awkward time, especially the Varisuit. I feel like the Varisuit is definitely one I cannot defend. I really like this game in terms of the gameplay. Sure, the D-pad is a pain in the butt to get used to, but it works. And you can't really blame Team Ninja for the gameplay mechanics because it was the director who wanted this game, and he was very pleased on how the resulting game came out to be. Do note that it is the Japanese version. Why do I say this? The fanbase of the Metroid series hates Samus's character in Other M. But if you look at a translation point, which by the way, I found the comment on Reddit, those who discovered the translation, because the translation changes really makes a big difference in terms of narrative and story representation for those people who are interested. and it's dramatically different. Definitely give Other M another chance if you're hating the story, but play it in Japanese and get it translated. I enjoyed this game, so definitely give this game a shot if you're a newcomer. Just don't have like super high expectations though. Then we come to the last game of the official timeline. That's canon. Metroid Fusion. This was the very first game I've ever played into our series. It gets an S. One, it taught me what a game difficulty should be. You're alone in a space station. I mean, you're always alone in most of the Metroid games. This one did it right. I mean, especially with the virus called the X Parasite, really felt like Samus was really powerless compared to the other entries. And the fact that she was on the verge to die, that really struck me home as a horror game. And the fact that you're always being chased by the SAX, Samus Aran X, it felt like a horror game. OST is really good. Boss fights are some of the most difficult in the entire series, but I enjoyed their OST. So Metroid Fusion definitely S tier. Metroid Prime Pinball is not a canon game, but it's still on this tier list, so I'm gonna give it a C. It's a pinball game. It works really well. It came with the Rumble Pack. It surely destroys Mario Pinball Land. I'll tell you guys that much. Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you enjoyed today's video. Consider hitting that subscribe button if you're new. Smash the like button. This has been Frosty All I gotta say is, stay chilly. Keep gaming. I'll see you guys in the next one.